The lights didn't go out all at once. They flickered like a dying pulse, then vanished, leaving the ER swallowed by a darkness so thick it felt physical. Machines fell silent. Screens went black. Somewhere a monitor screamed once before cutting dead. In the dark, people froze not from fear alone, but from the realization that rules, titles, and protocols meant nothing anymore. Doctors shouted orders that no one could see. Nurses groped for walls. Patients gasped as the seconds stretched into something deadly. And in the middle of that chaos, one voice didn't shout. It calculated. They had dismissed her all night. The new nurse. Too quiet. Too young. Too careful. No one noticed when she stepped forward, when she started moving people instead of asking permission. But when the ER became a battlefield, she didn't react like hospital staff. She reacted like someone who had trained for darkness. Before the lights came back on, everything would change. And when they did, no one would look at her the same way again. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if you're ready for a story about pressure, courage, and quiet authority, subscribe and stay with us. The ER at Street Eliza Medical Center never truly slept, it only shifted moods. At 9:47 p.m., the night shift settled into its usual rhythm, fluorescent lights humming overhead, stretchers lining the walls. The smell of antiseptic mixed with rain-soaked clothing dragged in from the storm outside. Wind battered the glass doors hard enough to make them rattle, and thunder rolled low like something heavy moving miles away. Emily Carter stood at the medication station, checking labels for the third time. 6 months. That was all she had. 6 months since she'd transferred from a rural clinic to one of the busiest emergency departments in the state. On paper, she was competent. On the floor, she was invisible or worse in the way. Carter, a sharp voice snapped. Dr. Harold Bennett didn't look up from the chart in his hand. Mid-50s silver hair authority pressed into every syllable he spoke. If you're done alphabetizing the drawers, I need labs drawn in trauma 3. 5 minutes ago. Yes, sir, Emily replied instantly. She moved without hesitation, but not without awareness. She noted the way Bennett didn't say her first name. The way he never did. To him, she was a last name and a liability, someone new enough to blame if something went wrong. Trauma 3 held a construction worker with a crushed forearm soaked in rain and blood. Emily prepped the drawer quickly, her hand steady. The patient groaned, sweat beading on his forehead. Easy, she said softly. You're doing great. The man's breathing slowed as she spoke, not because of the words, but the tone. Emily had learned long ago that calm was contagious. Across the bay, 2 senior nurses whispered. She's too quiet, one muttered. Yeah, doesn't belong in an ER like this, the other replied. Emily heard them. She always did. By 10:12 p.m., the waiting room overflowed. A multi-car accident on the interstate had sent a surge of patients, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. The charge nurse barked orders. Stretchers were rerouted. Tempers flared. Emily adapted. She memorized faces, injuries, oxygen levels. She clocked who was bleeding externally and who wasn't. She noticed which patients were getting louder and which were getting quieter. Quiet was dangerous. At 10:26 p.m., an ambulance arrived with a military ID flagged on intake. The patient was unconscious, clothes cut away, chest rising unevenly. No rank displayed, no entourage. Just another body wheeled into Trauma 1. Emily glanced at the intake sheet for half a second longer than required. Then she moved on. Carter Bennett said again, irritation creeping in. Why is Trauma 2 still waiting on fluids? I rerouted them to Trauma 5. Emily replied, already moving. The patient's pressure stabilized after compression. Bennett frowned. You don't reroute without asking. She didn't need the fluids yet, Emily said evenly. That earned her a look, a sharp one. Do not freelance in my ER, Bennett said. You follow protocol. That's how people stay alive. Emily nodded. Yes, sir. But something flickered behind her eyes. At 10:39 p.m., the lights flickered for the first time. Just a blink, enough to make a few people pause, then dismiss it. Storm surge, someone said. Emily didn't dismiss it. She lifted her gaze toward the ceiling, counting silently. 1 second. 2. 3. She watched the backup monitors. She noticed the hum change pitch. At 10:42 p.m., the flicker returned longer this time. A few machines reset. A ventilator chirped in protest. A ripple of unease moved through the department. "Facilities, what's going on?" the charge nurse called out. No immediate answer. Emily stepped closer to the wall map posted near the supply room. Most people saw it as a fire evacuation diagram. Emily saw something else: zones, choke points, power-dependent corridors. She traced a finger along the trauma wing mentally. If the power went out? No, not yet. At 10:47 p.m., thunder cracked so loudly it felt like it split the building. Then the lights went out. Not smoothly, not cleanly. They died in sections ER bays first, then hallways, then the waiting room. Darkness rushed in, swallowing color and depth. The hum of machines vanished, replaced by a sudden, terrifying quiet. A monitor screamed once. Then nothing. "Emergency power," someone shouted. Flashlights flicked on. Phone screens lit up, faces frozen between disbelief and panic. Emily stood still for half a heartbeat. Then she moved. She didn't shout. She didn't ask questions. She grabbed a penlight from her pocket, one she always carried, and headed straight for Trauma 1. "Who's on airway?" someone yelled. "I am a resident," answered, voice shaking. Emily leaned in, light steady. "Tube depth. 22. Check again," Emily said calmly. "Chest rise is asymmetric." The resident hesitated, then adjusted. The patient's breathing evened out slightly. "Good," Emily said. "Now stay with him." Across the ER, Dr. Bennett barked orders that collided mid-air. Manual ventilation. No, wait. Who has eyes on pediatrics? Why aren't the generators online? Who shut the doors? Emily didn't look at him. She moved to the nearest nurse. "You. Grab every flashlight and headlamp you can find. Bring them to the nurse's station." "Who told you now, Emily?" said voice firm but low. The nurse stared at her for a fraction of a second. Then she ran. Emily turned, scanning the darkened ward like a chessboard. Patients on machines, hallways without windows, locked doors controlled by dead systems. She inhaled, slowly. This wasn't an ER anymore. It was something else. And somewhere deep in the building, something was about to fail that no one was watching yet. Emily started moving toward it before anyone realized they needed her to. Darkness changed the sound of the ER. Without the steady chorus of monitors and ventilators, every breath became audible. Every cough, every whimper, every hurried footstep echoed too loudly as if the walls themselves were listening. The storm outside pressed closer rain, hammering the roof wind, forcing itself through unseen gaps. "Why isn't the generator on?" Dr. Harold Bennett demanded, his voice cutting through the black. No one answered immediately. The charge nurse's phone glowed as she frantically dialed facilities. No signal. "I can't get through." Across the ward, a patient began to panic. "I can't breathe. Where's the machine?" "Manual bag," someone shouted. Hands fumbled. Someone dropped equipment. Another monitor tried to reboot, failed, and went dead. Emily Carter moved through it all like she was counting time in her head. She reached the nurse's station just as two staff members dumped flashlights and headlamps onto the counter. "Good," Emily said. "Pass them out. One per patient bay first. No running." A senior nurse bristled. "Since when are you in charge?" Emily met her gaze, unblinking. "Since the lights went out." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. The nurse hesitated, then turned and started handing out lights. In Trauma 1, the unconscious military patient's oxygen saturation dipped. The resident bagging him cursed under his breath. Emily slid in beside him. "Slow your rhythm," she said. "You're overventilating." "How do you know?" he snapped. "Because his chest is rising too fast," Emily replied. "Match his physiology, not your panic." The resident adjusted. The saturation stabilized, climbing 1% at a time. He stared at her. "Okay." Emily nodded once and moved on. At the far end of the ER, pediatrics began to unravel. A toddler cried in the dark, her mother's voice breaking as she tried to soothe her. Emily diverted toward them, grabbing a glow stick from an emergency kit along the way. She cracked it with a snap, bathing the small bay in soft green light. The child quieted, mesmerized. Emily crouched to eye level. "You're okay," she said gently. "This is just a power nap for the building." The mother exhaled shakily. "Thank you." Emily was already gone. "Doctor." Bennett stood near the center of the ER, issuing commands that collided with one another. "You check the west hallway." "No, stay here. Who's watching Trauma 2? "We are." Two voices answered at once. "Then why is no one watching Trauma 5? Emily heard all of it. She filed it away and made a decision. She climbed onto a rolling stool and raised her voice, not loud but clear. "Everyone listen." The room stilled, not because she outranked anyone, but because her tone didn't compete. It cut through. "We're blind and running on muscle," Emily said. "So we simplify. No more bouncing between bays." Bennett turned sharply. "Carter, get down from there." Emily didn't look at him. "Airway and massive bleeding stay priority," she continued. "One team per patient. If you leave your bay, you tell someone. No exceptions." "That's not protocol," Bennett snapped. "Protocol assumes electricity," Emily said. "We don't have it." For a moment, the only sound was rain and distant thunder. Then a nurse said quietly, "She's right." Another voice followed. "We're losing track." Bennett's jaw tightened. "Fine," he said sharply. "Temporary measure." Emily stepped down and immediately began assigning zones not by hierarchy but by capability. Strong hands to compression, calm voices to pediatrics. The least experienced paired with the most steady. No one argued. Somewhere above them, a heavy door slammed as wind tore at the building. The sound reverberated through the dark. A tech ran in breathless. "The ICU elevators are down. We've got a patient up there on a vent with limited battery." Emily's head snapped up. "How long?" "Maybe 10 minutes." Emily was already moving. The stairwell was narrow and pitch black. Emergency lights hadn't kicked in. Emily took the steps, 2 at a time, penlight leading the way. She counted floors. 1, 2, 3. At the 4th floor landing, she heard it, the faint, irregular alarm of a ventilator struggling to stay alive. The ICU nurse looked up as Emily entered. "Thank God." "Facilities," says the generator's fried. Emily checked the battery indicator. "We've got 6 minutes. That's not enough." "It is if we don't waste them," Emily said. She repositioned the patient-adjusted tubing minimized drawer. Every movement was precise, economical. The ICU nurse watched her confusion bleeding into awe. "How do you know all this?" Emily didn't answer. Instead, she glanced at the windows lining the hallway, reinforced glass but old. Wind-driven rain lashed against them violently. "Is there a manual bag?" Emily asked. "Yes." "Good. When the battery dies, we switch immediately." No pause. The ventilator alarm shrieked once, then went silent. Emily was already there, hands steady breathing for the patient in the dark. Downstairs, the ER trembled as thunder cracked directly overhead. A transformer outside blew with a sound like a gunshot. Lights that had flickered faintly went completely dead. In Trauma 2, a patient's heart rate plummeted. "Code," someone yelled. Emily burst back into the ER just as chaos threatened to reclaim it. "Compressions now," she ordered, already counting. 1, 2, 3 hands followed her rhythm. "Doctor." Bennett hovered at the edge, face pale. "We can't keep doing this blind," he said. "We need evacuation protocols." "And send critical patients into a storm," Emily shot back. "No," Bennett bristled. "You don't get to override." A low, distant thump interrupted him. Not thunder. Something mechanical. Emily froze. She tilted her head, listening. There it was again. Rhythmic. Controlled. Rotor blades. Someone near the entrance whispered, "Is that a helicopter?" Emily felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with recognition. "That's not medevac," she said quietly. The sound grew louder, closer, circling. Dr. Bennett stared at her. How would you know that Emily didn't answer? Instead, she turned toward the helipad doors, just as a powerful beam of light cut through the rain outside, steady searching. And somewhere above the hospital, a military helicopter began its descent. The helicopter didn't land. Not yet. Its presence alone changed the air inside the ER like pressure before a storm breaks. The steady thrum of rotor blades vibrated through concrete and bone-rattling ceiling panels and loose carts. People stopped talking. Even the rain outside seemed to hesitate, as if waiting. Dr. Bennett straightened instinctively, authority snapping back into place. "Who called that in?" he demanded. "No one did the charge," Nurse replied. "At least not from here." Emily Carter didn't look up. She was kneeling beside Trauma, 2 counting compressions allowed, her voice steady enough to anchor the room. 27, 28. Switch. Hands traded places smoothly. Sweat glistened in the beam of a headlamp. Someone squeezed an IV bag by hand, knuckles white. Bennett stepped closer to Emily. "Carter," he said sharply, "I need to know what's happening." Emily didn't stop counting. "What's happening," she said, "is that we're losing time if we keep asking the wrong questions." That earned her a few startled looks. Bennett's eyes narrowed. "You're out of line." "Then step in," Emily replied, finally meeting his gaze. "Take over compressions, take over airway, take over triage, or let me finish." For half a second, Bennett hesitated. That was all it took. The patient's pulse returned weak, thready, but there. A collective breath rushed out of the room like air escaping a punctured lung. "Pulse," someone confirmed. Emily exhaled once controlled. "Good. Keep him warm. Minimal movement." She stood, wiping her hands on her scrubs, and turned back to the wider ER. Darkness revealed things light hid. People were clustered where they felt safest, not where they were most needed. 2 nurses hovered over a stable patient, while another bay went dangerously quiet. A resident stood frozen in the hallway, unsure which order to follow. Emily saw it all. "Okay," she said, raising her voice just enough. "We're resetting." Bennett bristled. "You don't get to," Emily cut him off, "not with volume, but with certainty. Trauma, 1 and 2 are red. Everyone else is yellow, unless I say otherwise. Green patients move to the east wall, seated blankets only. We need space." "That's not a suggestion," Emily finished. The words landed heavier than a shout. A nurse glanced at Bennett, then at Emily. Then she moved. So did another, and another. Beds rolled. Chairs scraped. Patients were guided, reassured, relocated. The ER began to breathe again, not calmly but coherently. Bennett stood there, watching controls slip from his hands, not through rebellion, but through competence. He hated that more. The helicopter's sound faded, drifting away from the helipad. Whatever it was doing, it wasn't here yet. Emily felt the absence immediately. "They're circling," she murmured. Bennett scoffed. "You don't know that." Emily didn't respond. She was already moving toward the supply room, grabbing trauma kits and stacking them by category. A senior nurse followed her. "Emily," she said quietly, using her first name for the first time, "what is going on?" Emily paused just long enough to choose her words. "The hospital's a choke point right now. Powers out systems are dead storms blocking transfers. Anyone coming in by air is doing it for a reason." The nurse swallowed. "Military, most likely." For who Emily looked back toward Trauma 1. "For him," she said. In Trauma 1, the unconscious patient's condition was slipping again. His breathing grew erratic, chest muscles straining against the tube. The resident looked helplessly at the dark monitor. "I don't like this," he said. His pressures dropping. Emily stepped in hands. "Sure." She adjusted positioning, checked for tension, relieved it with practiced precision. The resident stared. "Where did you learn that?" Emily met his eyes. "Some places don't have monitors," she said simply. "You learn to read people." Down the hall, a metallic clang echoed, then another. The security doors near the ambulance bay had locked automatically when the power failed. Now someone was pounding on them from the other side. "Let us in," a voice shouted. "We've got incoming." Bennett hurried over. "Open the doors, we can't," security yelled back. "They're magnetized, no power release." Emily was already there, inspecting the manual override panel. "Crowbar," she said. Security hesitated. "That'll damage the door," Emily finished. "Yes, but it'll open." She took the crowbar herself, wedged it into the seam and leveraged with controlled force. Metal shrieked. Bolts snapped. The door cracked open just enough. Rain blew in sideways, soaking the floor. 2 paramedics burst through, soaked and breathless, pushing a gurney. The patient on it was pale blood pooling beneath him. "GSW," one shouted. "Multiple." "We couldn't reach any other hospital." Emily glanced once. "Bring him to Red Zone 2. The paramedic blinked. "Who's in charge?" Emily didn't answer. She was already guiding the gurney. Bennett stared after her, stunned. The ER surged again, but this time it moved with purpose. Somewhere above them, thunder cracked violently. A window shattered in an upper wing glass, raining down into an empty hallway. Facilities finally crackled over the radio. "We're trying to reroute power, but it's unstable." "How long?" Bennett demanded. "Unknown." Emily didn't ask. She adapted. She assigned runners to relay information verbally. She designated a single wall as the command point. She rationed supplies like time itself was bleeding out, and through it all she never raised her voice. In the midst of the chaos, a patient grabbed her wrist. Elderly, eyes sharp despite the dark. "You've done this before," he said quietly. Emily met his gaze. "Yes, not here. No." The helicopter returned. This time it didn't circle. It descended. The roar grew deafening, shaking dust from the ceiling. A brilliant white light swept across the ER entrance, cutting through rain and darkness with surgical precision. Every head turned. Bennett felt his stomach drop. "That's not civilian," he whispered. Emily released the patient's wrist and straightened. "Everyone stay focused," she said calmly. "Do not crowd the doors. We keep working." The helicopter touched down hard on the helipad. Boots hit concrete above them, measured fast. Then a voice came through the radio at the security desk, clear and unmistakably military. "This is United States Army Air Unit. We are here for a critical patient. Identify your triage lead immediately." Silence swallowed the ER. All eyes turned slowly, inevitably toward Emily Carter. Dr. Bennett opened his mouth, but no one waited for him to speak. No one pointed at Emily. They didn't need to. The way people shifted, subtly stepping aside, clearing a path without being told, said everything. Authority had moved not through rank but gravity. Dr. Bennett felt it like a physical shove. That's my call," he said, forcing his voice steady as he stepped forward. "I'm the attending physician on duty." The radio crackled again, the military voice calm, impatient. "Negative. We need the person currently directing triage. Time sensitive." Bennett hesitated. That pause, barely half a second, was enough. Emily took the radio from the desk without ceremony. "This is Emily Carter," she said. "I'm running triage." The ER went dead silent. Bennett stared at her. "You can't just... Critical patient is male, approximately 180 pounds. Emily continued into the radio, already moving toward Trauma 1. "Respiratory compromise, unstable pressure. You're here for him." A beat. Then, confirmed. Bennett's face drained of color. Emily handed the radio back. "They'll be inside in 90 seconds, she said to no one in particular. "We clear a corridor from Trauma 1 to the west stairwell. No bottlenecks, no questions." A nurse swallowed. "Security doors are damaged." "Good," Emily replied. "Then they'll open." People moved, not because they were ordered, but because they trusted the math she was doing in her head. Emily reached Trauma 1 and checked the patient again. His jaw was clenched, muscles tight despite sedation. His breathing was shallow, fighting the tube. She leaned close, voice low. "Hold on." The words weren't for comfort. They were a promise. Boots thundered down the stairwell, moments later, fast, disciplined, unmistakable. 4 figures emerged from the dark silhouettes, sharp against the emergency lights they carried. Their uniforms were soaked from rain, faces set with the kind of focus that didn't waste emotion. A captain stepped forward. Which one, Emily didn't point. She moved. She guided them straight to the bed hands, already repositioning lines, making space. The team flowed around her instinctively, as if she were part of their formation. The captain watched her for half a second too long. "You're good," he said. Emily didn't answer. They worked in silence, controlled lethal efficiency. Equipment appeared from packs that didn't belong in a hospital. The patient was assessed, stabilized, prepped for immediate extraction. Bennett hovered at the edge, anger and disbelief wrestling in his chest. "You can't just take him," he snapped. "This is a civilian facility. There are protocols." The captain didn't even look at him. "Doctor, this patient doesn't leave here alive unless we move now." Bennett turned to Emily. "You let this happen." Emily met his gaze steadily. "I made sure he had a chance." That answer hit harder than defiance. As the team lifted the gurney, the patient's eyes fluttered open just for a moment. His gaze found Emily's unfocused, but aware enough. His lips moved. Emily leaned in. "Ward secure," he whispered. Emily nodded once. For now, that was all he needed. His eyes closed again. The team moved fast, disappearing back into the stairwell, rain and rotor noise swallowing them whole. When the helicopter lifted off, the ER seemed to exhale with it. For the first time since the blackout, there was space to feel what had happened. Bennett rounded on Emily the moment the doors shut. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. "You overstepped every boundary. You jeopardized this hospital, my license." Emily didn't flinch. "No," she said quietly. "I kept it standing." Bennett scoffed. "You think because the military shows up you get to rewrite how this place works?" I think Emily replied that when systems fail, people matter more than hierarchy. "That's not how medicine works." "That's exactly how emergency medicine works," she shot back. Around them, staff pretended not to listen. No one intervened. Bennett leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You're a rookie nurse. You don't have the authority. I didn't ask for it," Emily said. "I took responsibility." The words landed like a verdict. Before Bennett could respond, a tech ran in. Trauma 5s crashing. Internal bleed. Emily turned immediately. "Prep for manual transfusion. We don't wait for labs." Bennett grabbed her arm. "You will not," Emily shook him off. "Watch me." She moved and people followed. In Trauma 5, the patient, a teenage boy from the highway accident, was ghostly, pale lips blue. His mother sobbed in the corner, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Emily took control, instantly assigning tasks with precision. No wasted motion, no debate. The boy stabilized barely. When it was over, when the room settled into something like order again, Bennett stood at the doorway, chest heaving. "You're done," he said coldly. "As soon as this shift ends, we're filing an incident report. You don't get to play hero." Emily wiped blood from her hands. "I don't want to." "Good," Bennett snapped. "Because heroes don't belong here. Rules do." Emily looked at him, really looked. "Rules didn't turn the lights back on," she said. "People did." She walked past him. Outside, the storm finally began to weaken. Rain softened from a roar to a steady whisper. Somewhere deep in the building, a generator coughed, sputtered. Lights flickered faintly in a distant corridor. Hope, fragile, uncertain, crept back in. But Emily knew better than to relax. Because the hardest part wasn't the darkness. It was what came after when the lights returned and people decided who deserved credit and who would pay for what happened in the dark. She glanced back once at the command wall she'd built from nothing and wondered how long before someone tried to tear it down. The generator didn't come back all at once. It coughed, metallic, reluctant, then failed again, plunging half the ER back into shadow. A collective groan rippled through the ward. The brief taste of light had been worse than none at all. Emily Carter didn't react. She stood at the makeshift command wall, taped paper marker lines, names and times scrawled in controlled shorthand, watching the flicker like a weather pattern. When it died, she simply adjusted. "Okay," she said calmly. "Nothing changes. Keep moving." People obeyed. That was the part that unsettled Dr. Bennett the most. He watched from a distance as staff gravitated toward Emily without being told. No eye rolls, no resistance, just trust, the kind that couldn't be demanded. He clenched his jaw. In Trauma 4, a middle-aged man with shrapnel wounds groaned as Emily approached. His face was smeared with soot and dried blood, eyes sharp despite the pain. "You," he rasped, focusing on her with surprising clarity. "You're not ER." Emily checked his dressing. "You're bleeding less," she said. "That's good." He shook his head weakly. "You cleared the airway like a forward medic." Emily paused, just a fraction of a second. "I've watched people die who didn't know how to do that," the man continued. "You didn't hesitate." Emily tightened the bandage. "Focus on breathing." He caught her wrist again, firmer this time. "What unit?" Emily leaned in close, so only he could hear. "Not anymore." That answer satisfied him. His grip loosened. Across the ward, a nurse approached Emily quietly. "Facilities says power might come back in stages, but they warned systems could surge and fail again." Emily nodded. "Then we treat every flicker like it's the last one." The nurse hesitated. "Emily, Dr. Bennett's calling administration." "He's saying you, I know," Emily said gently. The nurse searched her face. "Aren't you worried?" Emily looked out across the ER. The dim lights, the exhausted faces, the patients still breathing because someone had made the hard calls. "I was worried when the lights went out," she said. Right now I'm busy. A commotion broke out near the east wall. A green zone patient, a man in his 30s with a head laceration, had collapsed, seizing. Move, Emily said, already there. She dropped to her knees, protecting the man's head, timing the seizure without a watch. Her voice was steady, grounding the room. Don't restrain. Clear space. He'll come out of it. He did. When it was over, Emily helped him sit up, guiding him through breaths until his eyes cleared. You saved my life, he whispered. Emily shook her head. You did. I just helped. But he shook his head harder. No. When everyone panicked, you didn't. Word traveled. It always did. By the time the generator sputtered again, this time holding the ER wasn't just functioning. It was unified. Lights returned in sections. Monitors blinked awake. Machines hummed uncertainly. Staff flinched, then steadied themselves. Emily raised a hand. No sudden changes, she called. Confirm readings manually first. People complied. Doctor. Bennett stood near the entrance phone, pressed to his ear. This is unacceptable, he hissed. A nurse took operational control without authorization. There needs to be accountability. He lowered the phone slowly, eyes locking on Emily. Administration's on their way, he announced, along with hospital security. A hush fell. Emily felt it, the subtle tightening in the room. Not fear. Anticipation. She didn't respond. Instead, she walked to the pediatric bay, where the toddler now slept, glow stick dimming in her small hand. Emily adjusted the blanket, smoothing it gently. Then she turned. Okay, she said. Next patient. Bennett exploded. Do you hear me? This is over. You're done. Emily met his gaze, calm as ever. Not yet. You think you're untouchable because the army showed up, he snapped. No, Emily replied. I think people are still dying. As if on cue, a monitor alarm blared in Trauma 5. Emily was already moving. The teenage boy's pressure had dropped again. His lips were blue. His mother sobbed uncontrollably. Emily assessed in seconds. We're losing him. Bennett stepped in front of her. Wait for the surgeon. There is no surgeon, Emily said. They're trapped across town. That's not your call. Emily looked at the boy, then at his mother, then back at Bennett. I'm making it. She performed the procedure with hands that did not shake. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Color returned to the boy's face. A breath went through the room like prayer. Bennett stared, horrified, not by what she'd done, but by the fact that it had saved a life. That was reckless, he said weakly. That was necessary, Emily replied. The doors at the ER entrance slid open with a mechanical hiss. Hospital security entered first, then administration. A woman in a tailored coat surveyed the scene, bloodstains, exhausted staff, makeshift command boards. Her gaze landed on Emily. You, she said. Who are you? Emily wiped her hands slowly. Emily Carter, she replied. ER nurse. The woman looked at the board. You organized this, yes. Dr. Bennett stepped forward eagerly. She acted without authority. The administrator raised a hand. Doctor, I'll hear from you in a moment. She turned back to Emily. Why? Emily didn't hesitate. Because the lights went out, she said, and someone had to keep people alive. The administrator studied her for a long moment. Then she asked quietly, Where did you learn to do this? Emily felt the weight of the room settle on her. She chose her words carefully. In places where mistakes don't get second chances. Silence. Outside, the storm finally broke apart, clouds thinning, rain fading to mist. Dawn wasn't far, but inside the ER something else was rising, questions that wouldn't fade with the dark, because now that the lights were back on, everyone wanted to know who Emily Carter really was. By the time dawn began to thin the darkness outside the ER windows, the ward no longer felt like a hospital. It felt like a perimeter. The return of partial power didn't calm anyone, it sharpened them. Lights came back unevenly, throwing long shadows across blood-stained floors. Monitors beeped out of sync, some accurate, some lying. The storm had passed, but the pressure remained heavy and unrelenting. Emily Carter stood at the center of it, hands resting lightly on the command wall she'd built from scraps. Red stays red, she said evenly. Yellow doesn't move unless cleared. Green remained seated. No freelancing. A resident hesitated. The lights are back. Shouldn't we reset to standard flow? Emily shook her head. Not yet. Systems are unstable. People are tired. That's when mistakes happen. Dr. Bennett heard every word. He watched her from across the ER, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Administration had stepped back, choosing observation over intervention for now. Security lingered near the doors, uncertain who they were meant to control. The battlefield had shifted, and Bennett was losing it. "You're running this like a combat zone," he snapped, stepping into the center. "This is a hospital." Emily didn't turn. "Hospitals fail too," she said. "Bodies don't care why." "That's enough," Bennett said sharply. "You're creating chaos." Emily finally faced him. "No," she said calmly. "I'm containing it." The words landed hard. A nurse spoke up before Bennett could respond. "She's right. We're functioning." Another added. "We've had fewer crashes since we stopped bouncing." Bennett felt something ugly coil in his chest. "You're all forgetting yourselves," he barked. "She doesn't have the authority to make these calls." "If something goes wrong," Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "If something goes wrong," she said, "it will be because someone chose pride over survival." Bennett recoiled as if struck. Before he could answer, alarms erupted in 2 bays simultaneously. Trauma. 2, pressure drop, trauma. 4, respiratory distress. Emily moved instantly. "You," she said to a nurse, trauma 2. "Manual transfusion. Keep him warm. You to a resident airway support in 4. I'll be there in 10 seconds. She split herself like a commander under fire, delegating, trusting, calculating. In trauma 4, the shrapnel patient from earlier began to decompensate. His breathing was labored, eyes glassy. Emily assessed in seconds. "We're losing lung function." The resident swallowed. "We need imaging." "We don't have it," Emily replied. "We work with what we see." She adjusted, positioning decompressed with precision. The patient gasped, then steadied. The resident stared at her, shaken. "That shouldn't have worked." "It didn't," Emily said. "It bought time." Across the ward, the teenage boy in trauma 5, stirred eyes fluttering open. His mother sobbed with relief. Emily caught sight of them and nodded once to herself. Time bought. Lives held. This was how battlefields worked. "Doctor." Bennett felt the room turning against him, not through rebellion but through evidence. Patients alive. Staff coordinated. Chaos reduced to noise instead of death. He couldn't argue with results. So he changed tactics. "You're risking everyone," he said loudly, making sure administration heard. "She's operating outside scope." "If a single patient files a complaint," Emily turned slowly, "then I'll answer for it," she said. Alone. That wasn't defiance. It was ownership. A low murmur rippled through the staff. Bennett felt the floor tilt. A hospital administrator, the woman in the tailored coat, stepped forward. "Dr. Bennett," she said evenly, "you've made your objection clear." She turned to Emily. "Nurse Carter, explain your strategy." Emily took a breath, not to steady herself, but to slow the room. "We're treating this like a mass casualty incident," she said, "because that's what it is. Power failure, storm isolation, external extraction, internal surge. The only way to survive it is clear roles, limited movement, and constant reassessment." She gestured to the board. "This isn't about control. It's about clarity. The administrator studied the wall, then the ward. And when do we stand down?" "When the last unstable patient is stable," Emily replied. "Not when the lights say it's okay." Silence followed. Then the administrator nodded once. "Continue." Dr. Bennett's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The battlefield plan held. Minutes blurred into hours. Staff rotated without being told. Supplies were tracked manually. Every patient was checked, then checked again. Emily never sat. At one point, a nurse offered her water. She took one sip, then handed it to someone else. In the brief lull before sunrise, the military captain returned, this time alone, uniform, damp eyes, sharp. He approached Emily quietly. "He made it," he said. Emily's shoulders loosened by a fraction. "Good." The captain studied her. "You ran this place like a forward operating base." Emily met his gaze. "I ran it like it needed." He nodded once. "They're going to ask questions." "I know." He lowered his voice. "If you need backup." Emily shook her head. "This isn't your fight." He smiled faintly. "It never is. Until it is." And then he was gone. As daylight crept in through shattered clouds, the ER began to look like itself again. Blood was cleaned, equipment reset, patients transferred safely, but the tension didn't fade. Because now that the emergency was ending, something else was beginning. Accountability. Dr. Bennett stood near the nurses' station, speaking quietly to security, his eyes never leaving Emily. She felt it. The shift in pressure. The battle after the battle. She walked back to the command wall one last time and began peeling the tape away. A nurse touched her arm. "You don't have to do that." Emily looked at the wall, then at the ward she'd held together with nothing but decisions. "Yes," she said softly. "I do. Because battlefields don't last forever, and when they disappear, only the choices remain." Morning didn't arrive with relief. It arrived with scrutiny. Sunlight filtered through the ER windows in thin, cautious bands, illuminating what the night had left behind. Tape residue on the walls, scuffed floors, dried blood no amount of mopping could fully erase. The machines were humming again, obedient and precise, as if they had never failed at all. Emily Carter stood near the sink, washing her hands for the third time in as many minutes. She scrubbed slowly, deliberately, as if the rhythm might ground her. Around her the ward moved in a quieter gear. Voices were lower, steps were measured. The battlefield had receded, but its memory lingered in every glance. Dr. Bennett broke the quiet. "This is where it ends," he said, stepping into her peripheral vision. His voice was controlled, now sharpened by resolve instead of panic. "Administration wants a full account. Security is pulling footage." Emily didn't look up. "Good," Bennett scoffed. "You think that helps you?" Emily rinsed her hands and turned, meeting his gaze fully for the first time since the lights came back. "I think the truth helps patients," she said. "Whatever it does to me is secondary." That answer unsettled him more than defiance ever had. Behind Bennett, the administrator approached, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the room like an auditor of storms. 2 security officers followed, posture neutral but alert. "Doctor," Bennett, the administrator said. "We'll start with you." Bennett straightened, eager. "I've already outlined the deviations from protocol. Unauthorized command decisions, scope violations, exposure to liability." Emily listened without interruption. When Bennett finished, the administrator turned to her. "Nurse Carter," Emily nodded once. "I'll answer whatever you need." "Start with this," the administrator said, tapping the clipboard. "Why did you assume operational control?" Emily took a breath. She didn't rush it. "Because no one else did," she said, "and people were dying." Security shifted subtly. A nurse paused mid-step to listen. "You're saying Dr. Bennett failed?" the administrator asked carefully. Emily shook her head. "I'm saying the situation changed faster than authority did." The administrator studied her. "You organized triage zones. You authorized procedures. You coordinated with military assets." "Yes." "Without permission." "Yes." Bennett smiled thinly. "There it is." Emily continued, unbothered. "Because permission takes time. Darkness doesn't." Silence fell. The administrator glanced at the security officers. "Pull the footage from 1047 p.m. onward." One officer nodded and stepped away. Bennett crossed his arms. "You're about to see chaos." Emily folded her hands in front of her. The first clip played on a tablet the moment the lights died. Panic, shouting, colliding orders. Then Emily appeared in frame, calm amid the blur, directing, assigning, stabilizing. The footage jumped forward. A patient's vitals stabilized under manual ventilation. A corridor cleared. A door forced open to admit incoming trauma. Another clip, pediatric bay. A glow stick cracking a child, calming. Another, trauma, 5. The teenage boy's color returning. The room grew quiet. Bennett's smile faded. The administrator looked up. "Doctor," she said, "why were there conflicting commands at 1052 p.m.? Bennett swallowed. "We were assessing." "And at 1103, she asked. "We were, because from what I see," the administrator continued, "Nurse Carter established a functional chain of action within minutes, and once it stabilized, adverse events decreased." Bennett bristled. "You're rewarding insubordination." "I'm observing outcomes," the administrator replied evenly. She turned to Emily. "One more question. Where did you learn to do this?" Emily felt the room lean in. She considered the truth, not the whole of it, but enough. "I was trained to operate when systems fail," she said, "to make decisions with incomplete information, to accept consequences without hesitation." The administrator's eyes sharpened. By whom Emily met her gaze? By people who don't get a second chance. A beat passed. Then the administrator nodded. "Security," she said, "stand down." Bennett stared. "You can't be serious." "I am the administrator," replied. "This isn't a disciplinary hearing. It's a debrief." She faced Emily. "You will submit a full report. You will attend a review panel. And until then, you're on paid administrative leave." A murmur rippled through the staff. Bennett's eyes gleamed. "So she's suspended?" "No," the administrator corrected. "She's protected." Emily absorbed that quietly. The administrator softened her tone. "Nurse Carter, what you did was risky, but it was effective. The hospital needs to understand that." Emily nodded. "I understand." As the group dispersed, a nurse approached, Emily eyes bright. "You're a legend," she whispered. Emily shook her head. "I'm tired." The nurse laughed softly. "Fair." Emily gathered her things from her locker, nothing special, just a spare penlight and a folded piece of paper with handwritten notes. As she stepped out of the ER, she paused, looking back at the place that had almost swallowed itself whole. Dr. Bennett stood by the station alone now. He watched her, something unreadable flickering across his face. "This isn't over," he said. Emily nodded. "No," she agreed. "It never is." She walked into the daylight, the hospital doors closing behind her with a quiet finality. Above the building, the sky was clearing. The storm had moved on. But somewhere inside, the echoes of rotor blades still circled questions, truths, consequences waiting to land. The questions didn't wait. They followed Emily Carter out of the ER, down the corridor, into the thin morning air where the hospital's automatic doors slid shut behind her. The storm had rinsed the city clean, leaving streets slick and shining, the sky pale with early light. Sirens wailed somewhere far off, ordinary emergencies resuming their place in the world. Emily sat on a low concrete bench near the ambulance bay, elbows on knees, penlight rolling between her fingers. Administrative leave sounded like rest. It wasn't. It was a pause, one she knew too well. Her phone buzzed once, a number she didn't recognize. She stared at it for a full breath before answering. "Carter." "Emily," a male voice said, calm, precise. "This is Colonel Mark Holloway, United States Army Medical Command." Emily closed her eyes briefly. "Yes, sir. I won't keep you long," Holloway continued. "Your patient stabilized post-extraction. He's alive because of decisions made before we arrived." "I'm glad," Emily said. There was a pause. "You ran triage under blackout conditions." "Yes, sir." "You coordinated a ward like a forward operating base." "Yes, sir." Another pause, longer this time. "You were never briefed on that patient." "No." "And you recognized what he needed anyway." Emily turned the penlight once more between her fingers. "He needed time." Holloway exhaled softly. "That's what I thought you'd say." Inside the hospital, Dr. Bennett sat alone in a conference room, staring at the blank screen where footage had played minutes earlier. Every moment replayed itself in his head, the confidence, the calm, the way people had moved for her without looking back at him. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself authority always returned to its rightful place. But doubt had found a seat at the table. Back outside, Holloway's voice returned. "There will be an inquiry," he said. "From our side. Routine." Emily didn't flinch. "Understood." "Before that," Holloway added, "I want to be clear. You're not in trouble." Emily almost smiled. "Almost. Why call me then?" she asked. "Because he said you disappeared." Emily's grip tightened on the penlight. "You left without ceremony," Holloway continued. "No commendations, no noise. We expected you to resurface eventually. Just not like this." "I didn't disappear," Emily said quietly. "I stopped." The colonel didn't argue. "The hospital doesn't know who you were," he said. "They will." "I'm not asking them to," Emily replied. Holloway's tone softened. "You never do." He ended the call with a simple, "Take care of yourself, Emily." She slipped the phone into her pocket and stood stretching stiff muscles. The city felt louder, now brighter, less forgiving. Inside the hospital, the review panel convened early. The administrator sat at the head of the table, flanked by legal counsel and risk management. Dr. Bennett sat rigidly across from them, hands clasped, expression carefully neutral. "We've reviewed preliminary footage," the administrator began. "Outcomes were significantly better than projected under the circumstances." Bennett leaned forward. "You're ignoring the precedent. If nurses start taking command, they already do," the administrator interrupted calmly. "They just don't announce it." A murmur passed through the room. "This nurse Bennett pressed has a background you don't fully understand." "Then help us understand it," the administrator replied. "Because right now all we see are lives saved." Bennett hesitated. He thought of the way Emily had spoken without fear, without ego, the way she had accepted blame before praise. It unsettled him. "She was trained elsewhere," he said finally, clearly. "But that doesn't make her above policy." "No," the administrator agreed. "It makes policy incomplete." Outside, Emily walked the length of the hospital grounds, stopping beneath the helipad where rainwater still dripped from steel supports. She looked up at the sky where rotor blades had cut through darkness hours earlier. She remembered other skies, other nights, places where power wasn't expected, only endurance. A memory surfaced unbidden. A field hospital, lights out, dust thick as smoke. A young medic, freezing hands shaking. Emily stepping in, not louder, just steadier. Counting, assigning, making the dark manageable. She had learned then what no manual taught. That chaos listened to confidence. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text. "Known review panel scheduled tomorrow 0900. Recommend you attend." Emily typed back a single word. "Emily," acknowledged. As she pocketed the phone, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear, exposure. Inside, the ER staff whispered in corners. Some defended her fiercely. Others worried aloud about lines crossed. The story was spreading growing edges she didn't recognize. Dr. Bennett overheard 2 residents talking. She didn't panic once. She took responsibility when no one else would. Bennett walked past them without comment. Later that afternoon, the administrator stood alone in her office, reviewing a sealed envelope delivered by courier. Inside, a brief service record. Redacted. Commendations without descriptions. Training locations omitted. But the dates were clear. Years in places where darkness was the rule, not the exception. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "Emily Carter," she murmured. "Who did you try so hard not to be?" That evening, as the hospital settled into a fragile normal, a man in plain clothes arrived at the front desk. He carried himself with the same quiet precision Emily recognized instantly. "Here to see Nurse Carter," he said. "She's not on shift," the clerk replied. "I know," the man said. "I'll wait." Emily arrived later to retrieve something she'd forgotten, a notebook tucked in her locker. She froze when she saw him leaning against the wall near the elevators. "Still bad at leaving quietly," he said with a faint smile. "Still bad at waiting," Emily replied. He straightened. "They're going to put you under a microscope." "I know. They always do," he said. "When someone breaks the mold and doesn't apologize for it." Emily met his gaze. "I'm not here to prove anything." He nodded. "That's why it scares them." As they parted, Emily felt the ground shift beneath her feet, not because of what she'd done in the dark, but because the light was catching up, and light demanded answers. Tomorrow the hospital would decide what kind of place it wanted to be, and whether there was room in it for someone who refused to panic when everything else failed. The review room felt colder than it should have. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady, reliable, indifferent. A long table divided the space, polished to a sterile shine. At one end sat hospital administration, legal counsel, and risk management. At the other sat Emily Carter, hands folded, posture relaxed but alert. She had slept 2 hours. It was enough. The administrator began without preamble. "This panel exists to determine whether actions taken during the blackout constituted negligence or necessity." Emily nodded. "Understood, Doctor." Bennett sat 2 chairs down from the administrator, eyes fixed on the table. He hadn't slept at all. A screen flickered on. Footage rolled, timestamps, angles, moments slowed and dissected. The blackout. The first commands. The reassignment of zones. The forced doors. The helicopter arrival. "Pause," legal counsel said. The image froze on Emily, standing between two arguing physicians, her body angled slightly forward, not aggressive, not submissive. "Explain this moment," counsel said. "You interrupted the attending physician." Emily didn't glance at Bennett. "I redirected attention," she said. "Two leaders issuing conflicting commands increases error. Someone had to collapse the noise." "Why you risk management?" asked. "Because I was closest," Emily replied. "And because I was calm." Bennett looked up sharply. "Calm is not a credential," he said tightly. Emily turned to him for the first time. "No," she agreed. "It's a requirement." A ripple of discomfort moved through the panel. The footage resumed. A patient stabilized. Another transferred. A third saved without imaging. "Stop," the administrator said quietly. The screen froze on Trauma 5, the teenage boy eyes fluttering open as color returned to his face. "Dr. Bennett," the administrator, "said you objected to this procedure." Bennett cleared his throat. It was outside scope. Dangerous. And yet the administrator said the patient survived. Bennett stiffened. Survival does not justify violation. Emily leaned forward slightly. "It doesn't justify inaction either." Legal counsel raised a hand. "Nurse Carter, did you consider the legal consequences of your decisions?" "Yes," Emily said. "I accepted them." The room went still. "You accepted them," counsel repeated. Emily nodded. "Every time I made a call, I assumed I would answer for it later." "That's how you decide cleanly." Risk management frowned. "You're saying you expected to be punished." "I expected to be accountable," Emily replied. "There's a difference." Dr. Bennett let out a short, humorless laugh. "This isn't a battlefield." Emily met his gaze steadily. "No," she said. "It's where people come when the battlefield follows them home." The administrator watched the exchange closely. "Nurse Carter," she said, "why didn't you defer?" "Once power began returning because partial systems are more dangerous than none," Emily replied. "People assume safety too early." A pause. "That assessment proved accurate," the administrator said slowly. Bennett shifted in his chair. "You're setting a precedent." The administrator turned to him. "So did she," she said, "under impossible conditions." Silence stretched. Then the administrator closed the file in front of her. "This panel finds that Nurse Carter acted in good faith under emergent conditions," she said. "We will not pursue disciplinary action." Bennett's head snapped up. "You can't." However, the administrator continued, "There will be a systems review, protocol updates, training revisions." She looked directly at Emily. "And you will be asked to contribute." Emily absorbed that without expression. Bennett stood abruptly. "This is a mistake." The administrator's voice hardened. "Dr. Bennett, sit down." He didn't. "I've given 20 years to this hospital," he said. "And you're letting a nurse teach us something," the administrator finished. "Yes." Bennett stared at Emily, something fractured in his eyes. "You think this ends well?" Emily rose slowly, meeting him eye to eye. "I think it ends honestly." He left the room without another word. Afterward, the administrator walked with Emily down the corridor. "You're not required to stay," she said. "But if you do, things will change." Emily considered the scuffed floors, the distant beeps, the lives stitched back together by exhausted hands. "I'm not here for comfort," she said. The administrator nodded. "Neither are we." Later that day, word spread. Nurses stopped Emily in the hallway, not to praise her, but to thank her. A resident asked for advice on crisis leadership. A paramedic saluted her without irony. Emily accepted none of it. She clocked in checked assignments and went back to work. Dr. Bennett didn't return to the ER. By evening, an internal memo circulated. Measured, careful, unmistakable. Leadership under emergent conditions would be reviewed. Cross-training expanded. Chain of command clarified for system failures. Some called it reform. Others called it fallout. Emily finished her shift as quietly as she'd started it. As she stepped outside, the sky burned orange with sunset clouds, thin and harmless now. Her phone buzzed once more. "Unknown, they did the right thing." Emily typed back, "Emily, so did we." She walked to her car, shoulders easing at last. The blackout was over. The reckoning was not. The ER looked ordinary again. Too ordinary. By the time Emily Carter returned for her next shift, the floors had been scrubbed to a dull shine. the command wall erased as if it had never existed. Fresh memos were taped neatly to the bulletin board, temporary protocol updates, revised escalation pathways, carefully worded acknowledgements that avoided names. The battlefield had been cleaned. Emily clipped on her badge and stepped inside. A few heads turned. Conversations paused, then resumed. Nothing dramatic, just a subtle recalibration like a room adjusting its temperature. "Morning," a nurse said, softer than usual. "Morning," Emily replied. She checked the assignment board. No special roles, no exceptions. She was back where she'd started, ER nurse mid-row, nothing highlighted. That was fine. She didn't need a spotlight to function. What she didn't expect was the silence from Dr. Bennett. He hadn't been seen since the review panel. By mid-morning, rumors circulated quietly he'd been reassigned to administrative duties pending evaluation. Some said temporary, others said permanent. No one said it out loud near Emily. In Trauma 3, a patient with chest pain deteriorated suddenly. Emily moved instinctively, positioning oxygen rapid assessment while a resident called for backup. When the attending arrived, he didn't push her aside. He asked, "What do you see?" Emily answered. They worked together. The patient stabilized. Afterward, the attending nodded once. Good call. It wasn't praise. It was respect. Emily felt it settled somewhere deep and quiet. Around noon, the administrator appeared on the floor, not in a suit this time, but scrubs. She observed without interrupting, watched the flow, the interactions. She stopped near Emily. "How does it feel?" she asked. Emily considered the question. "Like the lights are on," she said, "but people are still learning where the shadows are." The administrator smiled faintly. "That's honest." Later, as Emily charted notes, a security officer approached. "Nurse Carter." "Yes, there's someone asking for you. Says it's important." Emily followed him to a quiet consultation room near the back of the ER. Inside stood the military captain from the night of the blackout. This time, no rain on his uniform, no urgency in his stance, but the same sharp focus in his eyes. "Captain," Emily said. He nodded. "You look less tired." "Temporary condition," she replied. He smiled briefly, then sobered. "The patient you stabilized, his name is Daniel Reyes." Emily nodded. She remembered the face, the tension in his jaw even under sedation. "He's awake," the captain continued. "And insistent." "On what?" "On thanking you." Emily shook her head. "Tell him he doesn't owe me anything." "I did," the captain said. He disagreed. He handed her a folded note. No insignia, no markings, just handwriting. Emily didn't open it immediately. "Administration knows I'm here," the captain added. "This isn't a violation. I didn't think it was." He studied her for a moment. "You could have gone back, after everything." Emily met his gaze. "I chose to stay." "Why?" she answered without hesitation. "Because this place needs people who don't panic when systems fail." The captain nodded slowly. "So did the places you left." Emily didn't respond. He turned to go, then paused at the door. "They're changing protocols," he said. "Because of you." "They were overdue," Emily replied. He smiled once more, still bad at taking credit. Emily waited until he left before opening the note. It was short. "You gave me time. Time is everything. I won't forget that. D.R." Emily folded it carefully and slipped it into her pocket. The rest of the shift passed without incident. No blackouts, no storms, just the steady churn of ordinary emergencies. But something had shifted. People asked questions before issuing orders. Nurses spoke up sooner. Residents hesitated less when something felt wrong. Not perfect. Better. Near the end of the shift, Emily passed the old command wall location. For a moment, she could almost see it again, markers, taped decisions made in seconds that stretched into lives. She paused, then moved on. As she reached the exit, the administrator caught up with her. "One more thing," she said. "We're creating a new role. Crisis Response Liaison, cross-departmental." Emily didn't turn. "You want me to take it?" "I want you to consider it," the administrator corrected. "You'd still be a nurse. Just with permission." Emily thought of the blackout, the darkness, the absence of permission and how little it had mattered. "I'll think about it," she said. Outside, the sky was clear, bright, ordinary. Emily stood for a moment, breathing in the quiet. She knew this wasn't the end. It never was. Because every system failed eventually. Every hospital would face its own darkness, and when it did, the real question wouldn't be who was in charge, but who was willing to act. Behind her, inside the ER, a monitor beeped irregularly. Not an alarm, just a reminder. 3 weeks after the blackout, the ER at Street Eliza Medical Center faced its first real test. Not a storm, not a power failure, a decision. The morning briefing was unusually full. Nurses leaned against counters, residents stood shoulder to shoulder, attendings formed a loose semicircle. The administrator stood near the whiteboard, arms crossed, not defensive but deliberate. Emily Carter stood near the back, coffee untouched in her hand. "This won't take long," the administrator began. "But it matters." She gestured to the board, where a new heading had been written in careful block letters: Emergent Failure Response Protocol. This protocol was drafted after a full review of the blackout incident. The administrator continued. "It recognizes that in extreme system failures, rigid hierarchy can cost lives." A murmur rippled through the room. Dr. Bennett was not there. That absence spoke louder than any announcement. In these scenarios, the administrator went on, operational authority will temporarily shift to the individual, demonstrating situational clarity, regardless of title, provided accountability is immediate and documented. Some people exchanged glances. Others nodded slowly. Emily felt the weight of it settle, not pride, not fear. Responsibility. The administrator turned. "Nurse Carter." Emily straightened instinctively. "You've been asked to serve as crisis response liaison," the administrator said. "This role bridges departments during failures, power systems, mass casualty. You train staff, you don't outrank them." She paused. "But when the lights go out, they listen to you." Every eye turned toward Emily. She felt the silence press in, not hostile, not reverent, expectant. Emily took a breath. "I didn't plan to stay," she said calmly. "After the blackout, that caught a few people off guard. I'd already lived one life where darkness was normal," she continued. "I came here to do something quieter, something human." She glanced around the room, faces she'd seen under headlamps, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, hands that had shaken and then steadied. "But what happened that night made something clear," she said. "This place doesn't need another rank. It needs readiness." No one interrupted. "I'll take the role," Emily said. "On one condition." The administrator raised an eyebrow. "Name it." Emily met her gaze. "We train everyone, not just leadership. When systems fail, titles don't save people. Teams do." The administrator smiled, slow, genuine. "Agreed." Applause didn't follow. Respect did. The weeks that followed were quiet but purposeful. Emily ran drills in stairwells and darkened wings. She taught residents how to read breathing without monitors. She showed nurses how to prioritize when everything screamed at once. She never raised her voice. She never took credit. And when asked about her past, she answered only what mattered. "I learned how not to panic," she would say. "Everything else is technique." One evening, long after shift change, Emily sat alone in the break room reviewing notes. The hospital hummed around her lights, steady systems obedient. Her phone buzzed. "Unknown. You changed more than you think." She didn't need to ask who it was. Emily typed back. "Emily, systems change. People choose." She slipped the phone away and looked out the small window toward the helipad. Empty now. Quiet. She thought of the night it hadn't been. Of darkness thick enough to swallow authority. Of fear loud enough to drown logic. Of a moment when someone had needed to decide and she hadn't looked around to see who was allowed. That was the difference. Not bravery. Clarity. Down the hall, a code blue alarm chirped, brief controlled. Staff moved swiftly, efficiently. Emily rose without hesitation, coffee forgotten, steps already measured. The patient stabilized within minutes. As she washed her hands afterward, a new nurse watched her with wide eyes. "How did you know what to do?" Emily met her gaze in the mirror. "I didn't," she said gently. "I just didn't freeze." The nurse nodded slowly, absorbing that. Emily clipped her badge back into place and stepped out into the corridor, the ER alive and steady around her. The lights were on, but she knew the truth now. Light wasn't what kept people alive. Preparation did. And when darkness came again, as it always did, someone would be ready. When everything is working, leadership looks like authority. Titles matter. Protocols guide. Systems hold. But when the lights go out, when alarms die, rules blur and fear fills the space where certainty used to be, leadership looks different. It looks like someone who doesn't panic, someone who sees clearly when others can't, someone willing to act first and explain later. Emily Carter wasn't the loudest voice in the room. She wasn't the highest rank. She didn't demand control. She accepted responsibility. And that's the difference. In every hospital, every workplace, every moment of crisis, there will be a choice: protect your position or protect people. The world doesn't need more titles in the dark. It needs steadiness. It needs courage without ego. It needs people who step forward when permission disappears. If this story resonated with you, share where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if you believe quiet courage matters, subscribe for more stories that remind us who we become when everything else fails.